2025 is shaping up to be a groundbreaking year for diabetes technology. From AI integration in CGMs to new insulin pumps getting released or going into pivotal trials, the innovations are coming fast. And today we're diving into what it all means and why it matters for people with diabetes. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech news and management with industry leaders, physicians, and those using the tech themselves. Joining me today is Gary Scheiner, a certified diabetes care and education specialist who's lived with type 1 diabetes for nearly 40 years. He's the owner and clinical director of Integrated Diabetes Services, a practice that specializes in intensive insulin therapy and advanced education for both children and adults. He's also the author of several books, including one of my favorites called Think Like a Pancreas. I've thrown links to both his practice and that book in the show notes. Today, Gary walks me through what to expect from new innovations coming this year, from Medtronic's newly announced insulin pumps, one of which will go into pivotal trial this year, updates we can expect from Tandem and Omnipod, and updates on the Twiist Pump, which uses a cleared version of DIY Loop. We get into all of that and more. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up for my newsletter and blog. The bi-monthly newsletter will keep you up to date on the latest in diabetes technology and all the content we have coming out on our platform. A link to sign up for that is in the show notes. And real quick, a major update coming to Dexcom geofencing. There is no longer a problem while traveling abroad as long as you have installed the app initially in your home country. Your location is only checked during that first installation. So if you need to re-download the app on your phone or through your account while traveling, you will be fine. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this show or any of my platforms is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Gary, welcome back to the show. You're a crowd favorite, so it's good to have you here. I'm sure people are really happy to see your face and hear your voice.
I'm in a good mood. The Eagles won the Super Bowl. I'm feeling great. Emotionally great. Physically, I got a little bit of a cold, but well worth it for a Super Bowl victory.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. We're going to get into a lot of specifics, but I want to start with just 2025 in general. What do you think will be unique or different about diabetes treatment or innovations this year?
To be honest, I don't think there's going to be anything earth-shatteringly different. It's like years past where we're seeing incremental improvements in the things that already exist. We're going to see probably better automated insulin delivery devices, probably better infusion devices to go with those systems. Insulin is not going to change. The companies, the insulin manufacturers around the world, they've kind of divested all their research money and resources into GLP-1s instead of insulin these days. So we're not going to see a lot of new stuff there. From a product development standpoint, we'll probably see some new iterations of CGM systems. We're still hoping for a dual hormone type of an AID system, and that's kind of in the not too distant future, but not in 2025. I don't think we're going to see something like that. Medically, it seems like any innovations in the type 2 space are not finding their way into the type 1 space. There was recently the FDA didn't approve sotagliflozin, which is a SGLT2 inhibitor. It's a dual functioning type of a drug that seemed to benefit people with type 1 significantly, especially those with potential kidney problems. And they rejected it outright just because of risk of DKA. So I think that doesn't bode well for the development of new drug treatments for type 1 diabetes care. So it's more in the device space that we're going to see stuff. Well, the CGM companies, a couple of them are looking into developing ketone monitoring as well as glucose monitoring in their systems.
On the note of ketones, do you think that there could be more at play with ketones that we're just not aware of because it's not something that we're consistently testing as people with diabetes?
There's a few different aspects of ketone monitoring that could be utilized. A lot of people now are following ketogenic diets, Rather than going the GLP-1 route, they're using very low carb diets, and to lose significant weight, they put themselves in a state of mild ketosis, which isn't dangerous per se unless they become dehydrated at the same time, and that could lead to ketoacidosis. But otherwise, just to monitor one's ketone levels, being able to monitor, blood levels or body fluid levels of ketones will be important. But for people with type 1, it's more important to monitor ketones to prevent ketoacidosis. So if an infusion site failure occurs, or if insulin spoils, or if one doesn't take the insulin they're supposed to, monitoring ketones is important, because it'll alert you there's a problem, and then you can address it and keep yourself out of DKA.
Last year was very much the year of AI. Like, I completely implemented it into my workflow. It has helped in so many ways. And we're seeing Dexcom, they just brought AI onto Stelo, their glucose monitor that's for, people with prediabetes or type 2. I haven't tried it myself. In fact, I do have a Stelo waiting at home that I need to try on and look into those AI features. But how do you see AI coming into this space, perhaps this year, or, just in the future in general?
I don't know that it's going to have a tremendous impact on the day-to-day lives of people with diabetes. We have algorithms now that are not all that intelligent per se. They're fairly simple algorithms. The ones we use in AID systems are kind of like a thermostat on your house. It gets hot, the air kicks on. It gets cold, the heat kicks on. Or like cruise control that adjusts the gas pedal if you're slowing down. What we're talking about, I wouldn't know if I'd call it AI, but they're more advanced algorithms that have some capability of learning from prior experience and making adjustments to insulin delivery and the timing of insulin based on things that it's learned from the past. So it's really just more of an advanced algorithm than artificial intelligence per se. I do think it's going to have potential to help clinicians, though, in simplifying their lives. Because right now, diabetes management it's a very sophisticated algorithm with a lot of meds and a lot of variables that can come into play. So having advanced algorithms that can look at quantities of data and figure out where some of the trouble spots are, it's a very time-consuming process for clinicians right now. And even things like charting and taking, documenting notes, progress notes, AI may be able to assist in those areas. They're more clerical type things that clinicians can use the help with to be able to focus more on patient care. AI sounds wonderful. It's this pie in the sky concept, but in reality, it's not going to make that big a difference, I think, in day-to-day patient care and management of diabetes.
Yeah, like, while AI is so great and can help in a lot of ways, it's possible that it's not going to be until we get to AGI, which is artificial generated intelligence, I believe, which is essentially when artificial intelligence can make, like, problem solve. Because right now it doesn't actually problem solve. But I could see that next level of AI really helping us not only look at the data and understand it, but come up with ideas for how we can change our lifestyle. Because, having a diabetes educator has been one of the most helpful things in my treatment, understanding why certain things are happening at certain times, why certain foods and exercises are doing things. And I do see the potential down the line for AI to act as this dedicated diabetes educator that doesn't just see you 30 minutes a week, but understands you every minute of the day, and really can get into the nitty gritty.
Justin, think about the devices that you might have connected. You might have an activity tracker of some kind that you use, a sleep tracker. They've got the rings now for mood tracking. There's all kinds of variables that influence glucose levels. It comes back to like Adam Brown had that list of 4 gazillion things that affect your glucose levels, and there are a handful of major ones, but in most cases, the only things that we're looking at is insulin, and in some cases, the food we eat or the activity, but there's a lot more than that. The types of activity, how much sleep we got. For women, what stage of the month you're in, weight changes. There's so many variables, and we're only scratching the surface right now with those. But with activity, with trackers, things that are tracking these types of events, then a more advanced algorithm can be quantifying them in an objective way and maybe pointing out, every day you get more activity in the morning, you have a tendency to go low that afternoon. There's a delayed effect. Or the nights where you get, your sleep is more restless and you don't have as much quality sleep, you tend to run higher those days. And we can interpret that into adjustments to our insulin program. Thinking like a pancreas that's me on my book, but there's so much that goes into that. And interpreting those patterns, figuring out the causes, and then coming up with practical solution. It's a lot like being a detective. You're getting the clues, and then you're finally trying to solve the crime, as it were.
Yeah, and we're seeing a new partnership with Dexcom and Oura Ring. Oura Ring is a fitness tracker. It's a ring that you wear on your finger that can track stats like stress, sleep, activity, body temperature. It can track menstrual cycles for women. It can track when you're getting sick. And Dexcom wants to bring this in and allow you to kind of see those stats next to your glucose levels. What do you think are the implications of being able to wear a device and get all of that information?
It's incredibly valuable, because once you've figured out, you got all these suspects and you're just trying to figure out, all right, what really happened? A lot of physicians will just look at something and say, you just ate and you didn't take insulin, or you're eating more than you should. They make these assumptions that aren't always right. Sometimes they're right. Super Bowl Sunday, man, I ate a lot. I went real high. But, a lot of times they're making incorrect assumptions. And not only clinically is it ineffective, but it's insulting to people. We're living 24/7 with this chronic disease. And we don't want to have these kind of insults thrown in our face that it's all our fault. We just need to be better detectives. And these advanced algorithms with a lot of inputs, it's going to allow us to be much better detectives than we have been in the past.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens when we tie all this together and can see on an app what things look like side by side. Dexcom sent in a 15-day Dexcom G7 to the FDA. This was a few months ago. Do you think that that's going to come out in 2025? Based on your experience, I mean, the CGM already exists. They're just proving that it lasts another 5 more days. Is that something that you think will be pretty fast in the FDA process?
I think there's a good chance that it will. The issue there, though, is, it may provide reasonably accurate data for 15 days. But already we're seeing, even with the G7, these sensors don't always last us the 10 days that they're intended for. There can be signal issues, just product quality issues, and it's not just Dexcom, it's every sensor runs into these problems. So just to say, it's indicated for 15 days, will it last that long is another story. And then you also have to consider, how much of a difference will that really make? Now you're having to change a sensor twice in a month instead of 3 times. And I think for most people, changing a sensor, whether it's a Libre or a Dexcom, it's a snap. I mean, it's so quick and easy to do. And, the warm-up times are minimal now. There's tricks for getting around the warm-up time with the Dexcom's G7 that, from a quality of life standpoint, how much of a difference is that really going to make? Medtronic, I give them credit. Their extended wear infusion set is nice. I wish other companies will follow suit, hopefully soon. But it's indicated for 7 days. Some people get more, but a lot of people get less. I think the data on this was about 60 some odd percent actually get a full 7 days out of their infusion, those extended wear sets. So it's not always going to really last that long in the real world. But having to change out less often, it's a convenience thing.
With the Medtronic and extended infusion set, you said 50% of people get to the 7 days. What is happening for the people that aren't getting those full 7 days? What are they noticing that they're like, oh, I got to change this out early?
Yeah, I think it was about 68% or
Okay.
so in their studies got to the full 7 days.
Okay.
It's similar with the sensors. Either the site comes off, just adhesion issues, irritation occurs at the site, but the bigger problem is glucose control becomes erratic, where the insulin's not absorbing as effectively as it should below the skin, and you have persistent or stubborn high glucose levels. And if there's one variable we could do without, it's whether our insulin is doing what it's supposed to. So having insulin we can count on to work when we know it's going to work really does matter.
A 7-day infusion set really excites me, and the idea of all pumps moving to that length would be just incredible. I wear Omnipod. I have to switch it out every 3 days, and 7 days would just be such a huge upgrade from the experience I currently have when it comes to just, taking the time to switch it out, but also packing for vacations and not having to bring as many supplies.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 30-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic.
Let's stick with Medtronic for a bit. So Medtronic recently announced that they have 2 new insulin pumps in development. At the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, they announced both of them. So we've got the 8 series tubed pump. This would be the upgrade from the current 780G pump. It's half the size. It kind of looks like a vape pen. There's no screen on it. It's going to be controlled right from a phone. What do you think that this pump needs to bring in order to be competitive in the space? Because, Medtronic's current pump, it's a bit clunky and it's kind of fallen a bit behind, but this one really seems like it could get ahead.
It's analogous to the Mobi that Tandem launched last year, where it's a small pump. Likely will have just one button built in so that you can bolus manually if you don't have your phone with you. And from what I've seen, it's not switching a lot of people to pump therapy, but it's giving existing pumpers another option of a much smaller and more discreet option to use, just from an ease of use standpoint. So it's the algorithm and all of the insulin delivery part is pretty much the same. It's just a form factor change that we're looking at. So with Medtronic, their devices that they're developing, they announced their pivotal trials taking place this year. So I wouldn't expect anything this year to be launched. I mean, it takes time to conduct those trials. Then there has to be an FDA submission. FDA takes quite a while to review these things. So perhaps next year we'd be looking at something new from Medtronic.
What is a pivotal trial?
It's a study with real people, human beings actually, but mainly in terms of getting FDA approval, they got to prove its safety. It's a whole new design. I'm sure there's a lot of new patents that went into developing it. So they have to just prove that it's safe. People aren't going to be harmed by using it. So usually those are run over a period of a few months. Then the data is collected, everything is submitted. They got to be, it's administered, the study is administered by a third party that Medtronic contracts with, but they're really diligent about looking for any problems, ease of use issues, functionality issues, where people could potentially do harm, hurt themselves in using the device.
This is a system that we could be seeing maybe early 2026 or at least 2026. Does that sound reasonable to you? Yeah.
Absolutely. They've had the same pump form factor going on at least 10 years now, so it's well overdue that they come out with something. But they really put a lot of resources into their diabetes products, and I'm sure they're going to launch something that's going to succeed for them. Their
Yeah.
sensor, that's the other side of things is they're on multiple iterations of their sensor now. We're hoping the next version of it is going to be a lot easier to use.
Yeah, they have the Simplera coming out. It's already come out in many countries. I got to try it on myself. I made a video about it, my like first impressions using it. That's on YouTube for people who want to go watch and see it in action. And I had a very good experience with it. The accuracy was very good. I tested it alongside a Dexcom G7 and my blood glucose monitor, and everything looked great. But it only lasts 7 days, still has a 2-hour warm up. So there are some obvious shortcomings, but it's at least good to see that they've moved on from the clunky Guardian sensor. But they also teamed up with Abbott to work with them with their Libre technology to come out with a new sensor. What that tells me is that they're not super duper confident or excited about the fact that their sensor, the Simplera, is far behind. And that to me, it seems like they're working with Abbott to get a sensor that lasts 15 days, has a shorter warm up. What are your thoughts on that partnership there?
Honestly, I don't know how much of that is strategic and how much of it is political posturing on their part. This partnership announcement was earlier last year, and Medtronic realized that they've got to do something because they were losing business left and right to pumps that synced with Dexcom or Libre. I don't know if they're ever actually going to have a pump with a Libre sensor integrated, because I think it was just kind of a bridge until they're able to launch their Simplera with the system they've got. I've been demoing the Libre 3 Plus over the last few months. It's got some nice qualities to it. I mean, personally, I still found the Dexcom G7, even the G6, to be a more reliable sensor. I found a lot of issues with the Libre system in a near hypoglycemic range, just in terms of generating a lot of false low alerts that were
Oh,
a bit
wow.
disruptive and kind of made me lose confidence in it. Statistically, they show all the data that it works well in a hypoglycemic range, but that's just not been my experience. And with my patients who have used it, I've heard similar reports about an inordinate number of false low alerts that it generates.
So Medtronic also announced a new patch pump that they're working on. This has a bit of a modular design. You can kind of see the crevices between like the different parts of this pump. It's said to hold 300 units of insulin, which is a big boost from the current patch pumps that we have. It also, they're working to get it to last 7 days with their extended infusion set technology. What do you hope to see here with their patch pump? What do you think that they can build upon in order to come in and pose a threat to companies like Omnipod?
I mean, their pie in the sky dream is you have one device you put on for a week, it delivers your insulin, it's got the sensor built into the device, and an algorithm that automates the delivery. So it's a 1 week, call it an artificial pancreas, if you will, with they call it their advanced algorithm, etc. Ultimately, where the user won't even have to announce meals. So but the 300 unit volume though is still the limiting factor. And it's been a limiting factor for a while, is the volume that the pumps will hold. So having a device that'll last 7 days, great. Yeah, but if the device only holds X units, you got to figure how long it's really going to last. Somebody who uses more than like 30, 35 units a day, they're not going to get a full week out of the device. We've taken to using a more concentrated insulin with our patients who are a bit insulin resistant, use large doses. We'll use the Humalog U200 insulin. It's double the concentration, So you get twice as much life out of your pump reservoir as you normally would. But you got to be really careful about adjusting your settings accordingly, because the insulin is twice as strong as normal Novolog, Humalog, Apidra, Fios, whatever you're normally using. But it does double the life of your insulin reservoir.
Wow, that's fascinating. What are you seeing there? Are a lot of people beginning to use this stronger type of insulin? I guess, pumps put out as little as 0.05 units. So this sounds like the least you can get is 0.1 units. So people are doing this. And then also, are the algorithms built to understand this? Or is everything just halved, I guess, all the settings?
The algorithm works exactly the same. And the fact that you're getting 0.1 minimum for people on large doses, that's meaningless. 0.05 is not going to do anything for somebody who's using 60, 70, 80 units a day or more. Not a lot of people are doing it for a couple of reasons. One, it's not FDA indicated. That insulin is not indicated for use in pumps. Number two, the pumps don't have a switch where you can say, I'm using U100 or U200 insulin. So the clinician has to be willing to take a risk. The patient has to understand very carefully what they're using so that they don't accidentally overdose themselves. So it takes a well-educated patient and a clinician who's willing to take a bit of a chance to use this in an off-label fashion. But we do off-label stuff a lot anyway. We just started using glucagon as a way to prevent hypoglycemia during exercise, for example. There's a new version of glucagon called the Gvoke Kit. It's glucagon in a vial. So it's not built into a pen where you can't get the stuff out. It's in a vial, and you can microdose small doses of glucagon before exercise, particularly cardio or aerobic types of exercise. And it works really nicely for preventing hypoglycemia during physical activity. So you don't have to load up on food right beforehand or try to reduce your insulin level just while you're exercising, which is very hard to do. So it's a pretty effective way of preventing lows with exercise.
Well, why hasn't glucagon been as much part of the equation in a treatment level? Of course, we're using it as a safeguard for years. People using the Baqsimi for their nose or a Gvoke HypoPen. They're all like EpiPen style safety precautions. But why haven't we been using it as a form of treatment, like you're saying?
The studies are costly. It has to be studied, just like Medtronic's doing in their pivotal trials now. And those are very expensive studies to complete. Years ago, Beta Bionics was developing a dual hormone pump. They did that before the iLet that they have now. It was a pump with insulin and glucagon that could be infused through separate tubes in separate sites. And that, to me, is necessary to really develop a closed loop system. We don't have artificial pancreas technology at this point. We've got a single hormone open loop system where the user still has to manage things continuously. And there's still a lot of thought process that we have to go through. A dual hormone system, though, alleviates a lot of that burden on the user. At some point, we may see a third hormone called amylin, which slows digestion down so the glucose doesn't peak as high. And that hormone, it was a drug called Simlin that was launched over a decade ago to replace that. But that's a natural hormone that we don't produce as having type 1 diabetes. So having more than one hormone in the equation, I think, ultimately is what's going to drive success with these closed loop type systems.
Yeah, there are some exciting advancements going on in the dual hormone pump space. We've had a couple people on this show, a representative from Inrata, a company in Europe that has a dual hormone pump with glucagon and insulin that is being used by 200 people right now, and they're seeing pretty good results. And then you've got the Beta Bionics pump, which has been in development for about 20 years. Ed Damiano, the founder of the company, came on the show and talked all about the development in that space. And it sounds like they are moving closer and closer. In fact, they just got a ton of funding. They went public. Maybe we'll see them get a lot more funds coming in to really push that forward, because that really could mean this fully closed loop artificial pancreas that, takes over and does all the work for us. Last time we spoke, you mentioned that Tandem Diabetes was working on some upgrades to their algorithm. Could you tell me about what's going on over there, what they're bringing to their system?
Yeah, I mean, they're innovative in that their algorithm is updatable. In most of the other systems, you have to replace the full device. But with them, it's a simple software update where you plug your pump in and download it off a website. But they're not really changing the algorithm per se. What they're doing is offering up more features to the user while the algorithm is running. And I give Tandem credit. They've always allowed the user to extend boluses for a little while the automated called Control IQ, that algorithm is running. And they allow the user to switch profiles so they can be delivering more or less in the background whenever they need to. So they're enhancing that, and they're going to allow extension of boluses for up to 8 hours. And they're going to allow simple temp basal overrides while the algorithm is running as well. So the algorithm will still raise and lower, but you can kind of command it and say, well, do what you would normally do, but do it more aggressively or less aggressively with these temp basal adjustments. And
is that similar to like what we see in DIY Loop with the overrides? Is this giving you more flexibility to change treatment based off of the workouts? Or having had a really bad low, you want to make sure you're staying up higher or something?
Yeah, it allows the user a greater degree of control over what's going on. Absolutely. You can have customized temp overrides or temp basals for different workout situations, illnesses, stress, different meal types. The extended bolus alone, I think that's an important feature. Most of the AID systems out there don't allow the user to extend bolus delivery. It has to all be delivered at once. And that doesn't work with the typical American diet. We eat a lot of high-fat food. And other than high fat, we eat large volumes of food, which take longer to digest. And digestion-resistant foods like legumes and berries and dairy products, these things take longer to digest than the insulin takes to work, even quote-unquote rapid-acting insulin. Those insulins peak before the food does, and your glucose can take a dive.
What about Tandem's extended infusion set? We talked about this, I think it was 2 ADAs ago, so it would have been 2 Junes ago that they were working on this. What is taking so long? Do you think that this is something that we're going to see this year, a 7-day infusion set for Tandem pumps?
I think there's a chance we'll see it this year. It's similar to Medtronic. It's in pivotal trials now overseas. They got to do pivotal trials here as well. Tandem bought a company called Capillary Biomedical that developed a very different kind of infusion set. It's a reinforced, flexible cannula that doesn't crimp, it doesn't pinch off, which is a big problem with the plastic cannulas that we use now. When they kink, the insulin may still flow, but it causes tissue damage right around the area of the kink. And it's the tissue damage that affects the absorption of the insulin at the site. So yeah, we're hopeful that will come to fruition sometime soon. Because really, that's where the rubber meets the road. If your infusion site fails, it doesn't matter how good the pump or the algorithm or the sensor is, it ain't going to work. Your blood sugars are going to be awful. So an infusion set deserves that kind of attention.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes.
We're seeing all of these innovations coming to Medtronic, Tandem, and some others. What do you think Omnipod needs to do with their system in order to stay competitive with all of these upgrades coming to competitors?
Well, for starters, we're going to see the iPhone and the G7 and the Omnipod 5 all integrate finally. When they originally launched, their app only worked on Android devices. And then they got the iPhone app for the Omnipod, and it didn't work with the Dexcom G7, only the G6. So they got to catch up in those terms. So this year, yeah, we will absolutely see the iPhone G7 compatibility with the Omnipod 5. What I think Omnipod needs to do, though, to really stay competitive is they need to up the game in terms of the functionality of their app. They took away a lot of the user's ability to manage things. And granted, people do want to have to think less. They want to be able to just let the system do its thing. But the fact is, a lot of people don't want to sacrifice blood sugar control for the sake of just not having to be involved. So being able to make temporary adjustments, being able to extend boluses, maybe being able to carve out a basal program that runs in the background instead of using a flat, they call it an adapted basal rate. Those kind of things would make the Omnipod work better for users who want the best glucose management they can achieve. If you're willing to put effort in, yeah, you can achieve better results. And the systems that still allow users to use their intelligence and what they've learned ultimately can manage their glucose better.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of upgrades that can come to Omnipod physically as well. And I hope to see them innovate there and start talking about
what do you want to
next
see,
generation.
Justin?
Well,
I'm
so
curious.
okay, yeah. Well, I put out a whole video on YouTube going into all the changes I want to see, but some of the things that I talked about were I want to see a bolus button on the device. So what I love about Omnipod 5 is that the CGM and the pump will talk directly to each other, so you can leave your phone behind. But what it doesn't have is a physical button on it to allow you to give yourself insulin like the Mobi does, like Medtronic's new pump will have, like the Twiist Pump, which we'll get into in a little bit, has. And we're already seeing a device that kind of gives us a peek into what that could look like on Omnipod, I think, is the Eversense CGM, because that device is the same kind of plastic outer casing, but it has a button on it that allows you to, turn off alerts, whatever it is. I think that the Omnipod could also have some sort of silicone button on it that allows you to bolus 1, 2, or 3 units or go based off of carbs. I think that would be a huge upgrade in Omnipod, just to allow you to have that freedom to walk around. I would love to see a higher capacity of insulin. Up to 300 units would be great, or a smaller pump with the same 200 units is fine. And then I would love to see them increase the amount of days you can wear it. 3 does feel short. I know it is, for the most part, it's been a standard, the 3 days, but we're seeing these extended infusion sets up to 7 days. The technology exists, it's possible. And I think you'd have to assume that Omnipod is working to make their pumps last longer, because you've got, 2 of its competitors going to 7 days or already there. So those are a few things. I'm sure I had some other features that I want to see in my next gen Omnipod video, which I'll put in the show notes for everyone to watch. But I'm excited about where Omnipod could go. But it does feel like they've been in this comfortable, they're the sponsor of the show, but I'm allowed to say whatever I want. It does feel like they've been very comfortable, but it's soon going to be uncomfortable for them, right? You've got Tandem's Sigi tubeless pump coming, Medtronic talking about it. Beta Bionics just announced their tubeless pump. So Omnipod is going to need to bring these innovations very soon.
I agree completely. Yeah, they've gotten a little too comfortable.
Well, and I think their focus has been, it seems, getting availability everywhere. That's been kind of one of their focuses. That's kind of been one of the things they focused on is bringing Omnipod 5 around the world, but I think that they're going to need to start focusing more on those innovations soon and putting resources there. Speaking of innovations, you've got the Twiist insulin pump that was supposed to come out late last year. That didn't happen. This is the insulin pump that comes from Sequel MedTech, a company that was founded by Dean Kamen, who invented the first wearable insulin pump. The company's called Sequel because this is the sequel. I have videos about it on my channel. I actually got to see it in person and see the app. You know, what's so unique about it is that it has DIY Loop version 1 on it, but like a cleared version from Tidepool Loop. What are your thoughts on this insulin pump? What makes it unique compared to the other ones out there?
The form factor is unique. You know, it's
like a yo-yo.
Yeah, a yo-yo, maybe a little smaller than a hockey puck. So the form factor is kind of unique. It has a similar design to the Mobi, where there is an infusion set, a small tube. So you still can choose the infusion set that you want to use. You can still disconnect from it if you want to. What really is special about this system, though, is the algorithm. The Loop algorithm, I think, outpaces every other algorithm that's out there. It's the only algorithm that is considering food and predicting where your glucose is going. The other ones are just looking at the current glucose, the trend. It doesn't consider what's in your body digesting and is going to affect your blood sugar over the next several hours.
Right, you're allowed to add in the little emojis, the glycemic index of foods, which essentially when you choose like the pizza, that is like an extended bolus, right?
That's right. Okay. So when you enter your food, you do enter carbs. And you know, it doesn't have to be dead on accurate. If you estimate pretty closely, it's fine. But in addition to the amount of carb, you let it know whether it's a slow or fast or medium digesting kind of food. And if it's a fast digesting food, it's going to give a little bit more bolus insulin up front to cover it, and then drop the basal a little bit later to accommodate for the fact that you have a lot more bolus working as well. Loop is balancing active insulin against active food and to predict where your blood sugar is going to be going. And that's effective. Time and time again, I see that is a better way of predicting where the glucose is going to go. And with better predictions, it makes better adjustments in advance. It's not looking 30, 60 minutes ahead. It's looking 4 to 5 hours ahead. So the Loop algorithm is a smart algorithm. It does require the user, though, to be a little more engaged in their care. You can't just pick small, medium, large meal. You can't just enter the carbs and forget about it. You got to also think about the time factor. I mean, there's a default. It's like a 3-hour absorption default. But if you are eating a slow digesting meal or snack or a fast digesting meal or snack, you got to let it know so that the prediction is more accurate.
There's one thing that I find very cool about this algorithm. So what you're able to do is if you log carbs within 1 hour of that logging, you're able to go in and retroactively change the amount of carbs that you did eat, which is such a fantastic feature. It's something that I love so much about DIY Loop. On DIY Loop, you can change it, past 1 hour, you can go in and adjust those. But there are so many times when I put in like 75 grams of carbs, I get the food and it's horrendous, right? Like I'm like, I'm not eating this. And you're like, holy shit. Like I'm stuck with these carbs in my system, on typical algorithms. But with this one, you can go in and be like, oh no, I ate only 10 grams of carbs. And then it will do obviously it's not going to save you. Like you already had too much insulin, but at least giving it that information or lowering it down to 30 and then eating some low snacks in your pocket, whatever, will allow the algorithm to catch up and meet up with where you are. So I love that. Another thing that I love about this cleared version of Loop is the range goes as low. The target range goes as low as 87 milligrams per deciliter. You set a range, so it would be like 87 to 110, whatever, but it really does lower that that number. Most of the systems are 100, 110. How big of a difference is that 87 milligrams per deciliter?
It
Yeah.
makes a big difference.
Okay.
I don't recommend targets that low to the vast majority of people, though, because it doesn't allow enough of a buffer to prevent hypos. But for example, during pregnancy, we do need to manage much tighter than normal. And some individuals who are striving for modest improvements, if they're tightly managed now and want to get a little better, they can. So you have to be careful when using features like that and really know what you're getting into. For most people, we're still using targets of around 100 or 110 or 120. Those are safe areas, and you can still achieve really tight management using those targets. So, but remember, the Twiist version of Loop is an older version. It doesn't have all the features that the open source DIY system has now. So there's some key things like the ability to pre-bolus 4 hours ahead. That's not in the Twiist version, but it's in the current version of Loop. The ability to run those temp overrides, the percentage overrides that you might like to use. It does have an activity override. It does have, they call a pre-meal override, where you can aim a little tighter if you know you're going to eat shortly. But some of the fancier customization features that Loop has now, they're not going to be in the Twiist version.
Twiist also has this advanced occlusion technology, right? It uses sound waves to find occlusions sooner. Can you kind of speak to that, like what that is and how that will help people?
Yeah, I mean, if there are issues under the skin, remember I said this is where the rubber meets the road. The insulin that the pump is delivering, it has to get under the skin and absorb as expected. And if it doesn't, glucose levels become extremely unpredictable and hit extreme highs and lows. So being able to know when the insulin is not flowing into the site when it should, it'll be helpful. I'm not sure how much of a difference, though, it's going to make in reality, because we don't tend to see a lot of occlusions with the sets we use nowadays. Time will tell how much of a difference that really makes. It's certainly a nice feature to have. I don't know that it's going to make that big a difference in glucose management.
Last time we spoke, you said that you wanted to talk a little bit about Trio, the open source app. I have reported on that on my show. There's been a few episodes. This is a DIY app that many people are using that has a lot of settings. I mean, I used it myself, and I was seeing good control, but the settings were overwhelming. There were just so many of them. And, I just went back to DIY Loop because I was like, I get it. It's a little more simple. And my time and happiness was important to me. And finding that kind of balance of settings, control, and not focusing on my diabetes was just something I wanted to do. So went back to DIY Loop. For now, what are you seeing going on at Trio right now? What are your thoughts there?
Step back. Time in happiness. Tell me about that.
Well, I think that there's a balance between having great control, but also living in the moment. And I found that, and this is part of the reason why I don't wear my Apple Watch anymore, is I used to wear my Apple Watch to have my readings all the time and be able to see my levels. But then I found that I was overthinking my diabetes. I was being proactive, which is great. Being proactive is great in life. But I think that you also kind of want to focus on being reactive with CGM readings a little bit, because if you're overly looking at levels and where your levels are going, it will take you out of the moment. It will cause anxiety. I'm the tech guy. I love, showing my glucose wherever I can, but there's a balance. And I've found that balance with me.
I really like that approach, Justin. And I wish more people would follow that approach. And you can maybe do a show just about that.
Yeah.
I call it TIP, time in performance, because there's a certain glucose zone where people feel good and perform their best. And, time in range, whose range? It's different for different people. And ultimately, we manage diabetes, not so our numbers look good, but so we can feel good and perform well day in and day out. The Trio algorithm is a bit more aggressive. It has an ability to cover meals more effectively, even if the user doesn't initiate a bolus of insulin. So that's really what its appeal is having that ability. Not for all meals, but if you have relatively small meals, not real high glycemic index stuff, it handles them pretty well. We've got some people on my teams. We work with hundreds and hundreds of open source users using Loop, using Trio, and we try to coach them up as best we can. Now, for a lot of people, it's too complex. The burden on them to manage all these things, it doesn't put you in that happiness zone. So we don't always use all of that. But for people where their happiness is derived for being in a very tight glucose zone, those optional features are there, and we can use them. We can play around with some of the more sophisticated settings and help get them there as much as possible. My big thing with Trio is that I think it's still somewhat experimental, and we are still seeing some glitches within the program itself. Whereas with the Loop app, I think that's at least as safe, if not more safe than the other algorithms that are out there. It may not have all the guardrails the other systems have, but from a safety and performance perspective, it works great.
In the DIY space in general, it's always steps ahead of where FDA cleared systems are, just because there are less guardrails. They can do whatever they want. It's open source. It's a community of programmers. What do you think we'll see come from DIY Loop, Trio, these open source systems this year? What are they? What do you think they're planning?
I think we'll see integration with more pumps and more sensors. For us to go a few years and not be able to take advantage of new technologies, new advanced medications, that's time lost. That's less happy time. That's less time in our happy range because we don't have the opportunity to utilize those kind of things. So just, there'll be some programming changes. The user interface might improve, but to me, just the ability to take advantage of these great products and meds that are available and integrate them into that system, to me, that's most important.
Yeah, that's exciting. And if anyone wants to learn more about all these DIY apps, we've got podcast episodes and YouTube videos on my channel. Gary, it is always a pleasure having you on the show. I love talking to you about this stuff. And I'm absolutely going to have you on again at some point to talk about some more of this. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It means a lot.
Thanks, Justin. It's always fun when we get together.
What are you most excited for in 2025? Let me know in the comments on YouTube. And we have got a very, very special project coming out at the end of this week. I went to Los Angeles where I heard about all of these people with type 1 who were gathering supplies and donating supplies to people who were affected by the LA fires. This all happened immediately after the fire started and people were forced from their homes. All of their medication burned. People weren't allowed home. This is an incredible story, and I'm so excited to share it with you. It may be the most powerful piece I've ever produced. I had a crew with me. We got a budget from Medtronic. It is an incredible, incredible piece, and I'm excited for you to see it. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a link to that in the show notes if you're on a podcast platform right now. There will also be an extended podcast episode with one of the volunteers, maybe two, I haven't decided yet. And that's going to come out the following week. So stay tuned. It is an incredible video. It really shows the power of this community and how amazing all of us are. So I'm excited for you to see it. All right, I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.